Alright everyone, welcome back to Crypto Brain. Right now, something extremely unusual is quietly building inside the crypto market, and even experienced investors are starting to pay close attention, because the statements emerging from Ripple executives and institutional insiders over the past few days have completely reignited the conversation around XRP. But what makes this situation genuinely different is that the discussion is no longer centered around simple price predictions or retail hype. The conversation has now moved directly towards global financial infrastructure, institutional payment systems, government-level liquidity networks, and the future architecture of digital finance itself. Across social media, one question keeps appearing again and again. Why are banks, regulators, and major financial institutions suddenly showing such aggressive interest in the XRP ecosystem? Normally, when crypto projects attempt to achieve mainstream adoption, the process takes many years. Most projects spend their entire existence trying to convince institutions to even acknowledge them. But this time, the situation appears completely different, because Ripple itself is openly saying that banks are no longer thinking about pilot programs or experimental testing phases. According to Ripple's own executives, financial institutions are now discussing production at scale. And that single phrase has created both excitement and panic across the internet, because in the financial world, production at scale does not mean experimentation anymore. It means the groundwork for real-world deployment may already be underway. And this is exactly where the speculation becomes extremely interesting. If institutions are genuinely preparing for large-scale infrastructure rollout, then a much bigger question begins to emerge. Is XRP quietly being positioned at the center of the next-generation financial system? Because at the very same time, conversations involving the White House, stablecoin expansion, institutional DeFi, tokenized assets, cross-border liquidity, and regulatory frameworks all seem to be moving in the same direction. Many analysts now believe retail investors are still focusing only on XRP's price action, while the real battle is happening behind the scenes around liquidity infrastructure and back-end settlement systems. When you look deeper into Ripple's recent expansion strategy, the picture becomes even more fascinating. Ripple is no longer behaving like a standard crypto company focused only on payments. The company is aggressively expanding into custody solutions, stablecoins, treasury management, institutional brokerage, tokenization services, and enterprise-grade financial infrastructure. And according to several analysts, this matters far more than most people currently realize, because historically, only companies targeting long-term financial dominance attempt to build such a broad and interconnected ecosystem. What makes this even more significant is that Ripple's attention no longer appears focused purely on retail traders. Instead, the company seems increasingly aligned with banks, governments, multinational corporations, and institutional financial networks. Reports suggest that major institutions are no longer interested simply in holding digital assets as speculative investments. They now want the ability to move tokenized assets instantly, execute cross-border settlements in real time, integrate stablecoin-based liquidity systems, and operate within blockchain-powered financial environments capable of supporting global scale. At the same time, discussions surrounding institutional DeFi on the XRP ledger have started accelerating far faster than many expected. Events such as Paris Blockchain Week and Proof of Talk reportedly produced conversations that surprised even experienced industry participants, because for the first time, institutional finance and decentralized infrastructure were openly being discussed not as competing systems, but as interconnected layers of the same future financial framework. And this is exactly why some investors are now beginning to argue that the market may still be underestimating XRP's real use case. Because if institutions eventually begin using public blockchain liquidity, while simultaneously operating private financial systems on top of it, then assets like XRP could suddenly become extremely valuable as invisible back-end settlement infrastructure. In other words, the average retail trader may never directly see XRP functioning in the background, yet the entire system itself could quietly depend on that liquidity layer operating efficiently behind the scenes. And that is precisely the narrative now spreading aggressively throughout the crypto industry. What has added even more fuel to the speculation is the timing of everything currently unfolding simultaneously. White House discussions surrounding digital assets, evolving global regulatory frameworks, rapid stablecoin adoption, institutional blockchain development, and international banking infrastructure are all appearing within the same broader timeline. Naturally, this has intensified market speculation dramatically, because many investors now believe the world may quietly be entering a completely new financial transition phase, one where not only Bitcoin, but also utility-focused blockchain networks begin playing a major role inside the future global economy. And perhaps the most important detail of all is that this shift no longer appears theoretical. Ripple executives are openly describing a world where institutions want more than simple asset custody. Banks now want trading infrastructure, tokenization systems, treasury management, instant settlement capabilities, and seamless interoperability between traditional finance and decentralized systems. In other words, the conversation is no longer about whether blockchain technology will enter mainstream finance. The conversation now appears to be about which infrastructure providers will ultimately control the rails of that financial future. That is why many analysts believe the XRP story may be evolving into something far bigger than a standard cryptocurrency narrative. Because if the infrastructure being discussed today eventually reaches full-scale implementation, then the market may later realize that the real value was never just in speculation, but in becoming part of the underlying architecture powering the movement of value itself. And if that happens, the institutions currently positioning themselves early may already understand something the wider retail market still does not fully see. And honestly, that may be the single biggest reason why so many institutional players suddenly appear to be moving with urgency behind the scenes. Because if the future of finance truly revolves around instant settlement, tokenized assets, interoperable liquidity systems, and blockchain-powered infrastructure, then controlling the rails of that system could become one of the most important financial advantages of the next decade. Whether XRP ultimately fulfills that role or not remains to be seen, but one thing is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The conversations happening around Ripple today are very different from the conversations we were hearing just a few years ago, and that alone is enough to make the market pay attention. But as always, none of this is financial advice. This market moves fast, and volatility can change everything overnight. So always do your own research before making any investment decisions. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know your thoughts down below. Do you believe XRP is quietly becoming part of the next global financial infrastructure, or do you think the market is still massively overhyping the narrative? I would genuinely love to hear your perspective. Thank you so much for watching. It is always an honor. I'm Crypto Brain, and I'll see you in the next one.